Like all 16-year-olds, Drayga, known as Dray to his close friends, took on an apprenticeship. To many a bewildered member of the community, he became an apprentice to renowned antique appraiser Professor Kauto less than a month ago. This was unusual in the fact that in the professor's near 70-year career, he'd never taken on an apprentice. It caused murmur amongst the city, as the unusual professor had handpicked Dray, appearing at the apprentice inauguration ceremony held twice a year. It had stunned everyone to silence, as the reclusive professor simply pointed at the young wolf, turned, and then walked away. His main duties involved dusting the antiques the professor had collected over the years. There were a lot. It was clear that they hadn't been dusted for quite some time. Dray spent most of the month dusting the many antiques that the professor had created. Being of the wolf Kuguran, Dray's nose was incredibly sensitive. As the thick dust became disturbed by his movements, it sent him into a sneezing frenzy every 5 minutes or so. About 2 days into being an apprentice, a series of sneezing fits pushed Dray backwards into a large ornate vase, which fell off its display. Dray spun about, his eyes closed in anticipation of the sound of what was likely to be a priceless vase hitting the ground. Dray opened one eye, just letting in enough light to take in what was in front of him. A hand clutched the vase, holding it, not an inch above the ground. Dray opened his eyes further and looked upon a wan smile on the professor's face. Dray relaxed for a moment. Composing, he stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he stammered. The professor calmly set the vase back where it had been sat. It was on a long pillar which looked as though the slightest of breezes would knock it over. Dray couldn't help wonder why someone would balance such a priceless item on something so flimsy.
"Put your hands down, no harm is done."
Without any further words, he left the room. Bewildered, Dray looked on. There was no way the professor could have caught that in time, not from where he was working at least. He brushed it aside though. For an apprentice, his pay was triple that of any of the other professions. Who was he to worry about these sort of things? Besides, it was always thought that the professor had powers beyond imagining. Dray had finally finished dusting after nearly a month of hard work. He glanced at the room and soon realised that where he had started had already shown the first flecks of dust. His heart sank a little. A little jingle from the door chime turned his attention away, though. Stood in the doorway was a burly figure who had to duck just to get through. They held in their hand a small box. Dray felt his heart pound against his chest, threatening to break through. Something about that box sent shivers down his spine. What's inside? The customer stepped forward and headed towards the professor. Dray cast a quick glance at his mentor, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. Dray glanced away. Professor Kauto's attention wasn't entirely on their customer. Had he been observing him? Or at least that's what it looked like to Dray. When the customer came closer to the professor, his mentor greeted him. Dray attempted to make out what was being said, but it was in a language he hadn't even heard before. With that, Dray turned his attention away from his mentor and their customer, and observed an unusual shadow coming from behind. The wolf Kuguran stepped to the side and caught a glimpse of something silvery in the light from the lamp on the wall. Whatever it was disappeared almost instantly. The customer must have noticed as they turned towards Dray. Dray tensed. Soon enough, the customer's attention fell away from Dray, who sighed and began to resume dusting.
"Where are you going, Drayga?"
Professor Kauto murmured. Dray stopped in his tracks. "Well, I didn't want it to disturb you and the customer, so I figured I'd start dusting again."
"The dusting is done. A great job you did too. Now I need you here with your pen and quill to help take notes."
"But are you sure? It seems really important."
"Exactly. You don't think I'd pay you so much just to dust, do you? No, you'll work harder than that. Now pick up the pen and quill on the desk over there and follow us."
The professor had a slight edge to his voice. Dray quickly slipped to the desk and pulled off the pen and quill. Once clutched safely in his hands, he followed the two into the professor's viewing room. The room had a table in the exact centre, and there were instruments and lights pointed directly on it, giving the table an exact level of light across the entire surface. Dray made his way to the corner to observe. A quick glance from the professor told him that that was the wrong place to go. Dray stepped forward and stood behind his mentor.
Now, Dray, this is the first time you'll be observing one of these sessions, as I like to call them. You'll write down everything I say, as well as our friend here.
The professor gestured towards the large figure. It was strange, even with all the light, Dray couldn't make out the features of the person. There was nothing he could make out from them. It was almost as if he was staring into the form of a clothed shadow. He shrugged the feeling aside, realizing that he was getting drawn into the mystery of the figure. The professor had begun his session. Dray read through his notes before he handed them to the professor to review. He couldn't quite help thinking that there was something off about them. They read not like any conversation he'd heard before. In fact, there was clearly another voice entirely.
So, let's see what those keen Wolf-Kagaran senses picked up,
the professor said. His fingers wrapped around the notes and plucked them out of Dray's fingers. Wait, something's off with them.
Oh, do say.
He took a seat in front of Dray now, eyeing him. He still had the notes, but hadn't read them yet. Well, I'm sure I got your conversation with the customer, word for word. But that there are other things in there, as though there was a third person, as if... Dray paused. What he wanted to say sounded foolish. Folly, even.
Go on.
He leaned in, rapt with intrigue. Well, they were asking for help. For that I'm certain, Dray summarized.
I see. That would indeed make sense. Our customer is a soul diviner. They collect the souls of the lost and release them into the void. It's what powers our city and keeps everything running. This one, he produced the box that had the item he appraised in, was particularly powerful. A princess of a once powerful empire. Alas, they lost their way, and as part of their punishment were forced into this.
Professor Kauto pulled out a red orb. Its light bounced off the walls, pulsating every now and then.
This poor soul believes that she was tricked into the orb and therefore doesn't belong here. Now, because of her heritage, it is up to me to investigate if this is the case. In likelihood, she isn't wrongly imprisoned here, and she will join the other souls to go into the void.
And what if she is wrongly imprisoned?
Then it's a grave misjustice, and the soul diviner who brought her here will be punished. That you can hear her plea is a good sign that my selection of you as my replacement wasn't an error. Now it's time to rest. We have a big day tomorrow, your first investigation.
Wait, what happens to the soul if it's proven she's been wrongly imprisoned?
The soul transference is a one-way trip. Regrettably, the soul will still go to the void.
That doesn't seem very fair.
No, it doesn't, but it sure beats having nowhere to go. At least she'll be doing the world a service.
Dray stood, his fist pounding the table hard. This isn't right. What punishment will the diviner get? He asked.
Some sort of fine, nothing much. We need them to still be willing to get the souls. I mean, the compensation it will get for bringing something so powerful will no doubt snuff out any punishment. It's just the way it is.
Dray stepped backwards. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He managed to pick up his notes as he walked by the desk. He needed to read through them again. Read them to really understand the plight of this person. I'll be retiring now, he managed before rushing up the stairs to his room. Dray closed the door to his room, his heart threatening to beat right through his chest. He rummaged through the notes and circled all the times he had been spoken to by the soul, rereading everything she had said. There was one thing he had certain. The princess inside the orb was frantic. There must be a way to get her back, though. There must. It couldn't be just that for her now. Dray racked his mind in an attempt to figure out what to do.
You will help me, won't you?
A voice called out to him. Yes.
You know that is right. Please come to my aid. I don't deserve this. Rescue me, please.
Dray couldn't sit idly by now. He stood and picked up his satchel and moved to the door and opened it, then crept down the stairs. The professor had retired now. He always did at this time. It was like clockwork for him. A glass of brandy before heading out of his office up the stairs. Dray heard footsteps and halted. They were above his head. The coast was clear. He continued carefully. First, he needed to find something for the box. If he took the box, then the professor would know something was wrong. Having dusted everything before, he had a good idea what artifacts the professor had. There was another box similar to that one of the orb, with the soul in it. So he crept to that and found it. He opened it and there was another orb. This one was dim though. In fact, the light had gone out completely. He was certain it was no longer full of the soul it probably once housed. Dray picked up the orb and turned. His next destination was the desk where the professor had the box. Slowly, Dray made his way to the desk. Opening the lid, he saw the orb glowing frantically as though it knew someone was here to help. Dray took a deep breath and lifted the orb out of the box and quickly replaced it with the dead orb. He had to hope the professor didn't check on the orb straight away. Quietly, he crept towards the stairs on the right, but the door to the street was to the left. He'd already made one large choice. Could he make another? Thank you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed doing the whole story aspect to it, and it's something that I want to do more. Now, we've got the first part of a story here, and this is over this side, and this is kind of something that I have been thinking of doing for some time, and I didn't want to have it like, I just kind of like needed to have this nice little story where I'd be able to do. Now, you may notice that at the end of this story there's a couple of choices, and those choices will be sort of down to you. So I'm going to write the next chapter in this sort of story, as it were. I might only do like 5 or so chapters, but I want you to tell me, what choice did Drayga make? Did he go back up the stairs with the orb, or did he leave through the door? That's your choice to make, and I'm going to leave that to you to say down in the comments below. So until next time, I'll see you later.